Do I believe that there is or was life on Mars? Yes, I'm absolutely certain of it.
There are a lot of different objects on Mars that look exactly like sculptures that human beings make.
We have to ask ourselves what civilization built this and what happened to them.
There's no natural phenomenon that can account for this nuclear data. That is weapon signature.
Going to Mars, it's something we know somewhere in the back of our brains that we have to do or we die.
Since the dawn of civilization, mankind has credited its origins to gods and other visitors from the stars. What if it were true? Did extraterrestrial beings really help to shape our history? And if so, might we find the truth when humans land on Mars?
We are go for launch. Roger, go for launch.
Earth 2026.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition. We have liftoff.
4 civilian astronauts begin their 150-day journey to the Red Planet.
Velocity 14,899 miles per hour.
The voyage will take them deeper into space than any human has ever traveled. Over 128 million miles, 200 times farther than the distance to the moon.
You leave Earth at a pretty high velocity, and the spacecraft flies away from the Earth and away from the moon and away from the sun. The distance away may not be the biggest concern, and it only takes 5 months to get there. Oh, you can certainly withstand that. So the problem is getting back.
They're traveling so fast that they can go through 10 feet of solid steel. So a rocket has to be built so that it's very, very well shielded for human beings. It's not an easy trip, and there are momentous catastrophes that could occur.
I kind of like to compare that to when the first explorers were going across the ocean. Those were long, horrible journeys as well, and we survived those. And I really see Mars as one of the great first stepping stones to exploring space.
I was born with a fascination for space, and the only thing I wanted to do was explore. I wanted to know what was out there and get out there. And so by the time I heard about Mars One, it felt like there was a calling, a destiny there. What an amazing way to kind of give your life to the greater cause of humanity.
We are a species of explorers. And the reason why we keep looking out there, in my opinion, is because that's where we came from. Because you will not find any other organism on Earth that has such a fascination with space, with the stars, or with anything that displays such curiosity like human beings. And our next step will be colonizing Mars. So the idea that others have proposed is that we are nothing else but the Martians, so we are bound to go there.
According to NASA, the colonization of Mars will begin not with humans, but with robots, sent ahead to construct habitats, rovers, and life support units. Food and supplies will be sent next, and then finally, the first humans will arrive, ready to start their new lives as Martians.
The Martian environment is very different to Earth. It has 38% of the gravity of Earth. The daily temperature fluctuations are very extreme. For instance, if you're near the equator on a summer day, it can be as warm as 70 degrees Fahrenheit, but at night, the temperatures could drop down to minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's a lot of things out there that's getting us, including radiation as well in the dust storms.
The atmosphere is incredibly thin, about 1% of that of Earth. There's no breathable oxygen there. The radiation is very high as well. And so astronauts there are faced with multiple difficulties.
A Martian day is almost like Earth's. It's 24 hours and 39 minutes, so it's just a little bit longer than a day on Earth. But a Martian year is 2 years, because Mars' orbit is twice the size of Earth's.
Because of the day-night cycle and the thin atmosphere, Mars is the only nearby planet where large-scale greenhouses lit by natural sunlight can be utilized. These structures will allow the colonizers to grow their own food on the cold and barren planet.
Obviously, you can't rely on food parcels from home coming every 2 years. You're going to have to grow your own food. A lot of people think, well, that's pretty straightforward. You just take a few potatoes and cabbages, and away you go. You can do farming on Mars. Now, research that's been done at Arizona State University suggests that when you send microorganisms into space, they behave differently. They don't like it up there.
Hundreds, if not thousands, of PhD theses in the last 20 years have been written about how to grow food on Mars. And there was a very interesting experiment done a couple of years ago in Holland where NASA provided the Dutch with what they thought was almost an identical copy of the soil on Mars. And the Dutch planted 4,200 seeds in it of all kinds of different vegetables, and every single seed germinated. Some things did better than others, like carrots grew very well there. There is no question that we will be able to grow food on Mars, but it's going to be hundreds of years before we grow enough food on Mars that we can survive from the food we grow. The only way we're going to be able to do that is to terraform the planet so that it becomes much more Earth-like, so that we can grow crops on the surface of the planet.
In recent years, scientists have proposed various methods to terraform Mars, deliberately altering it to be more Earth-like. Most focus on melting the ice at the poles to release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere to thicken it.
If we heat up the poles on Mars, that causes a significant temperature rise on Mars, and we start having flowing water on Mars, especially around the equator. Then water itself will go into the atmosphere, which is another greenhouse gas, and we will warm up Mars, and we will be able to plant crops on the surface of Mars. But that's a ways away. That's probably at least 300 years away.
With missions from both NASA and the private sector now officially in the works, humans landing on Mars is no longer the stuff of science fiction. But will we really go so far as to terraform the planet so that we can establish permanent residency there? And if so, why? What is it about Mars that compels us to go there? Interestingly, the conditions on Earth 3 to 4 billion years ago are thought to be much different from what they are today. Like Mars, the planet was relatively uninhabitable and lacked an atmosphere. According to ancient astronaut theorists, directed terraforming may have been exactly how life was started on Earth. And as evidence, they point to our earliest creation stories.
When we look at the world's creation myths, one of the things that we find throughout these stories is the idea that the gods sought to create a stable environment on the Earth. The story of Genesis could be seen as a step-by-step guide for terraforming the Earth. On day one, God or the gods created the universe. On day two, the gods created the firmament. This is described as a dome or a boundary separating heaven and earth, followed by the appearance of plants and animals, and later human beings.
To me, when I look at Genesis, it is exactly the thought of an extraterrestrial visitation. I'm sure there's a God. There's no doubt about that there's a higher power. But somewhere along the line, extraterrestrials came down to this planet, created us, maybe even terraform the planet so that it could be adaptable to life. Heck, we're talking about doing that on Mars right now.
The things that we'll be doing on Mars may be exactly the same things that extraterrestrials did when they came to our planet. We'll be terraforming that planet, creating a more conducive atmosphere, melting ice caps to create rivers and lakes, and then perhaps even genetically manipulating organisms to better survive on that planet. And perhaps mankind is being guided by extraterrestrials to go to Mars and colonize that red planet.
With our plans to colonize Mars, are humans actually following in the footsteps of extraterrestrials that came to Earth in the remote past? Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that not only is this the case, but that there is even evidence these alien visitors might have come here from the very planet that is now our destination. Might life on Earth really have originated on Mars? And is it possible it was not by chance, but by design? And if so, just what happened to the Martians? Perhaps clues can be found by examining what some say is undeniable evidence of weapons of mass destruction. On March 10, 2006, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter reached its destination and began orbiting 186 miles above the Martian surface. It has circled the planet over 40,000 times and has sent over 264 terabytes of data and 200,000 images back to researchers on Earth. On September 28, 2015, NASA scientists announced that the images received from the orbiter had finally led to the kind of groundbreaking discovery they were hoping for: evidence of water on Mars. Photographs taken by the orbiter reveal streaks that appear to ebb and flow through the year, much like the seasonal flow of rivers on Earth.
Astrobiologists have had a wake-up call. If there is flowing underground water on Mars, and since we know that all the chemical structures on Mars for life are the same as they are on Earth, if you have that, it's unlikely that there is not life on Mars.
The big question everybody wants to know is there enough there for Mars life? And in my view, the answer is yes. You don't have to have liquid water lying around like a pond in order for microbes to make a living. There are microorganisms on Earth that live in Mars-like conditions. So do I believe that there is or was life on Mars? And I say, yes, I'm absolutely certain of it.
In 1996, NASA researchers studying a Martian meteorite found on the Allen Hill ice fields of Antarctica announce a shocking discovery: evidence of past microbial life on Mars. But curiously, they backed away from this conclusion shortly after it made international headlines. Over a decade later, scientists re-examining the meteorite determined that it does indeed contain organic matter and evidence of bacterial fossils.
The evidence for microbial life on early Mars from the meteorites is now very strong. It's almost overwhelming. Not only do some of the Mars meteorites show signs of early life on Mars, almost every one of them does.
While evidence of microbial life in Mars meteorites is groundbreaking, in 2013, geochemist Stephen Benner presented findings suggesting these meteorites point to a possibility even more astonishing than the notion that there was once life on Mars. He claims that they may be responsible for seeding life here on Earth. Benner reached this conclusion when he found that particular elements believed to be crucial to the origin of life are not readily available on Earth and would only have been present on the surface of the red planet.
I've always felt that Mars was actually a better place than Earth for life to get going. Now, Steve Benner recently has added to the appeal of Mars as the cradle of life by pointing out that certain elements that are actually essential for organic chemistry to work properly, like boron and molybdenum, which are more abundant on Mars than they are on Earth. We can imagine that life on Earth started on Mars, so in a sense we're all Martians, we're all descended from Martians.
Life on Earth, seeded from Mars? Could we, in fact, be Martians? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and suggest that this seeding of Earth may even have been a directed effort orchestrated by human-like beings that existed on the Red Planet. And they claim these extraterrestrial ancestors can be found in the apocryphal texts of the Hebrew Bible, represented as the fallen angels.
We know from ancient legend of the books of Enoch that there was a group of angels who descended to earth in violation of divine law. They introduced to humanity ways, means, knowledge, which we would understand today as science and technology. These angels were in human form. They were called in Hebrew Ishim, which means men. They looked just like us.
The fallen angels were giants. They were at least 10 feet tall, very striking to look at, enormous eyes, and no wings.
For over 100 years, mythologists have been contemplating this idea that the fallen angels came from Mars to Earth. Even Dante described this in the Paradiso. He called this the 5th level of heaven. Is it possible that the fallen angels came to Earth from Mars?
Could we reinterpret the story of fallen angels as beings not from heaven, but from Mars? Based on examination of the astronauts living in the International Space Station, scientists have speculated on what physiological changes might be seen in future generations of humans born on Mars. And ancient astronaut theorists suggest the resemblance to the description of fallen angels may be uncanny.
One of the most amazing things about the human body is its ability to adapt. And if you look at astronauts who go into space, they actually grow about 2 or 3 inches. And when you have a human that's born on Mars, what's going to happen is the environment will change the structure of the human body. And what you're going to see in a few generations is humans that are taller and skinnier because the gravity on Mars is less than that of Earth.
If humans evolved long enough on the planet Mars, they could grow to be taller, they'd have the bigger heads, they'd have the spindly limbs, they might actually grow slightly larger eyes that were equipped to see better in the dark because you simply have less sunlight on Mars than you do on the Earth because it's farther away from the sun. They could also end up looking like representations of angels and various other godlike beings that we've read about in the Bible and other ancient documents.
These attributes to somebody from a low-gravity planet like Mars or being in space for a long time may well be the attributes that we see of the fallen angels being very tall and spindly and perhaps pale and with large eyes. Something that we might expect to be coming from another planet, like Mars.
Might life on Earth really have originated on Mars? And is it possible it was not by chance, but by design? And if so, just what happened to the Martians? Perhaps clues can be found by examining what some say is undeniable evidence of weapons of mass destruction. Are there really telltale signs of orchestrated mass destruction on Mars? If so, might some of the survivors have made it to Earth? Perhaps further evidence can be found by examining the landscape of Mars and its mysterious formations that some say are alien artifacts. Spanning 2,500 miles across the equatorial region of the Red Planet is a colossal gash in the crust called the Valles Marineris. It is over 4 miles deep, which is 4 times the depth of the Grand Canyon. And it runs a length equal to the span of the United States from New York to California.
The Valles Marineris is one of the biggest trenches on Mars. It was named after one of the Mariner missions in the 70s. It has some very interesting geological features. It's quite huge. So it's really an interesting challenge to figure out what formed this valley.
It is truly immense. And the question is, why do these features occur on Mars on such a grand scale? The Grand Canyon is created by the Colorado River. I don't think the Valles Marineris was created by a river. It's very clear that it hasn't been made by water erosion.
The prevailing scientific theory suggests that the gash may be the result of volcanic activity combined with shifts in crustal plates. However, engineer Ralph Jurgens argued in his 1974 article Of the Moon and Mars that the geographic features of the Valles Marineris did not show signs of being torn and upended, as is typical of volcanic thrusts, but rather it appeared to be carved out. Jurgens proposed that the feature resembled the residual marks left behind by an electrical discharge. According to his theory, the area was zapped by a powerful cosmic thunderbolt, carving out the landscape as it advanced across the surface, blasting material into space. Although NASA scientists dismiss the theory, it has been gaining traction with electrical engineers. By using 2 electrodes to create an electrical arc over a sandy surface, they have been able to demonstrate on a small scale how the Valles Marineris could have been carved out by an electric bolt.
You don't see this type of thing with a volcano or an earthquake or any other type of natural occurrence. The feature itself resembles many of the electric discharges that we've done.
But could a cosmic thunderbolt be responsible for the massive gash across Mars? If so, was it a natural occurrence or an attack?
There are some very interesting stories of ancient advanced thunderbolt-like weapons. For example, in the Norse, Greek, and Vedic traditions, there is a weapon that can destroy entire worlds.
In the Vedic text, what is found is called Vajra. Vajra means thunderbolt. And this is a very powerful weapon that god Indra carries. And it was a special weapon that was designed to destroy this giant called Vritta. Vritta represented a dark force, and then he was creating havoc in the universe, so he had to be destroyed. And Indra used this weapon to destroy this giant.
Vajra is this super lightning bolt strike that devastates everything and is the most destructive weapon that the gods have. And if you look on Mars, that scar appears to be from some huge electric strike. Perhaps this Vajra weapon of Indra is hitting the planet and creating a huge canyon. And maybe what really changed Mars. And it would seem that these weapons are extraterrestrial in nature.
Could the Vajra, described in the ancient Vedic texts, be a superweapon used against the planet? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and suggest there is even evidence of other weapons of mass destruction being detonated on the Red Planet. In a 2014 paper published in the Journal of Cosmology, physicist Dr. John Brandenburg presented findings indicating that someone or something wiped out life on Mars with massive nuclear explosions.
There's an enormous spike in xenon-129 in the Martian atmosphere. Xenon-129 is produced by very violent nuclear reactions. I originally proposed as an explanation that this was a natural nuclear reactor that had gone unstable. However, as I talked to more scientists, they said, the xenon spectrum is wrong. That is weapon signature. That is not from any kind of natural nuclear reactor. The pattern of radiation on the Mars surface indicates that there is a global debris pattern extending from two hotspots of radiation in the north of Mars, going all the way around the planet. The regions of the residual radioactivity are covered in glass, the same sort of acid-etched glass that was found at nuclear test sites. It's called trinitite. So thousands of square miles of Mars surface apparently were turned to glass. Someone apparently dropped two massive nuclear weapons on Mars to explode in midair. There's no natural phenomenon that can account for this nuclear data. So we must go to Mars. We must find out exactly what happened there.
Are there really telltale signs of orchestrated mass destruction on Mars? If so, might some of the survivors have made it to Earth? Perhaps further evidence can be found by examining the landscape of Mars and its mysterious formations that some say are alien artifacts. Might the various structures and artifacts found on the surface of Mars really be evidence of a past Martian civilization? A civilization that was recreated on Earth? If so, why would NASA try to hide this connection? And might there be more that the public isn't being told? "554 solar days after the Mars Curiosity rover touched down, it beams its latest high-resolution panoramic photographs of the Mars landscape to Earth. Upon inspection, amateur archaeologists announce a startling discovery: what appears to be an effigy located at the Dingo Gap, resembling a human statue. The find is just one of the dozens of strange Earth-like objects sighted in the rover images, including a sarcophagus, a Buddha statue, and even a cross.
There are a lot of different objects on Mars that people see or think they see in various rover images. And it's really hard to dismiss them because they do look exactly like sculptures that human beings make. And even after a massive cataclysm, like what apparently took place on Mars, you're gonna find remnants from a lost civilization that's just leaving behind those last hints that we were here.
Ancient astronaut theorists have considered that there may be artifacts and unnatural structures on Mars since the first images were beamed back from the Mars Viking mission in 1979. NASA officials claim the perceived likeness of formations on Mars to man-made objects is due to pareidolia, where the mind perceives a familiar pattern, like seeing shapes in clouds. But some imaging experts are not convinced that it's just a trick of the eye. Joe White has been working in image restoration for 25 years and claims to have found artifacts on the Martian surface that defy explanation.
The rover images are generally fairly close up, and it is possible to spot things like statue heads and stone blocks, sometimes with writing on and carvings in them. It's such a shame they do so much to destroy these images. But basically what they do is they resize them down so that the details are all lost. But because I've worked in photographic restoration, I know how to do it. All I've done with this is actually enhance the contrast and sharpened it a little bit. The details I noticed first were particularly the eye and nose details on the front of the statue on the left here, with a quite clear mouth structure and what looks like an ear just here. and you have a long, narrow, elongated cone head shape to the statue. Now, this may well be an elaborate headdress on this statue here, which seems to be broken off. But it's hard to say for sure. I mean, this is a damaged statue, buried up to its chin, and there's probably a lot more of it buried just below in the sand. But you can actually see quite clearly it's the sort of thing you would expect to find somewhere like in Central or South America.
Might there actually be ruins of a lost civilization scattered across the Martian landscape? Ruins that mirror those that exist on our own planet. Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and propose that this is one of many artifacts on Mars that seem to have counterparts on our Earth.
Certain structures on Mars may be completely related to structures here on Earth. On Mars, we have structures that look like pyramids. There are standing stones and Stonehenge type of structures on Mars. There's also a structure on Mars that looks like a sphinx.
Around Cydonia, there are many, many objects, including an area called the City, where the so-called face on Mars is located. There's a massive pentagonal pyramid. There's a cluster of other pyramidal objects that are nearby. And one of the things that's really interesting about the City is that some people have pointed out that if you take the apex of all of the pyramidal structures there, and there are a number of them, that they basically match the layout of the Pleiades. Now, this is something that we've seen here on Earth. We've seen various ancient architectural monuments that are also laid out to reflect the constellation of the Pleiades.
Is it possible that the structures on Mars are real and of artificial origin? That is something where all of science says, no, impossible. Well, is it really? Water on Mars, impossible, right? No, it has been proven. So we have to ask ourselves, what civilization built this and what happened to them? And some have suggested that they actually escaped Mars and came to Earth to ensure their survival.
When we look to these extraordinary structures on Earth, similar to what we're now seeing on Mars, it makes you wonder, did our ancient extraterrestrial ancestors teach humans how to build these monuments, and knowing that one day we would rediscover our roots on Mars and be able to match up what we've done on Earth with what we had already done on Mars?
Might the various structures and artifacts found on the surface of Mars really be evidence of a past Martian civilization? A civilization that was recreated on Earth? If so, why would NASA try to hide this connection? And might there be more that the public isn't being told? Wernher von Braun's genius is credited with being the reason we ever made it to the moon. Might he have also orchestrated a secret mission to Mars? And if so, what was its purpose? The $2.5 billion Mars Curiosity is the most advanced rover yet to explore the Martian terrain. Beyond obtaining high-resolution photographs, as well as soil and air samples as it travels across the surface of the planet, it is also able to turn the camera on itself, a feature that enables engineers at NASA to diagnose and troubleshoot issues from Earth. Curiously, 50 solar days into its mission, the rover beamed a mysterious photograph back to Earth, showing what appeared to some researchers to be the shadow of a human-like figure working on the rover.
You could see a person there, and it even seemed that he was not wearing a helmet, but was in some kind of gear and goggles. And it made people speculate that what might be going on Mars is more than what NASA and also the military space program has said that we can achieve.
NASA knows so much more about Mars than they are telling us. They put pictures out, they allow things to come out, they do not comment on them in general, but they just allow people with eyes who want to see to look at these things and understand what they are, but they don't say anything about it because they're constrained by the political realities
couple of years ago, we got a call from a person named Jackie who claimed that she was a former NASA employee, and she went on with this profound story about how our rovers had sent back pictures that NASA has suppressed of humans on Mars walking around. And she was very compelling. She seemed to know exactly what she was talking about. There's always been a theory that there's a space program beyond the space program that we know. It's a black ops program. It's the program where trillions of dollars merely disappear and nobody knows where the money went and nobody knows what's going on.
A Scottish hacker named Gary McKinnon actually hacked into the NASA database and discovered a file which contained a list of what were called non-terrestrial officers, officers in the military that were actually living and working off of the planet Earth. Now, non-terrestrial doesn't necessarily mean Mars, but it does mean out in space. And what that indicates is that there is some kind of top secret space program that exists that the public doesn't know about.
Could there really be a secret U.S. military operation on Mars? If so, just how long has it been going on? Some researchers suggest that a feasible plan to get to Mars was conceived well before we even made it to the moon, and by the same scientist that got us there.
Wernher von Braun was a rocket genius, and he was obsessed with going to Mars. He was obsessed with rocketry, and he wrote a book in 1948 called The Mars Project, and it's basically a 91-page manual on how to get to Mars. It has all the computations worked out, all the formulas for what Hohmann transfer orbits you need to use to get to Mars. He actually projected that he could put people on Mars by 1965. Everything he put in that 91-page manual is actually still valid today.
Wernher von Braun outlined our plan to go to Mars and colonize it. Well, everybody thinks, well, we just never did that. There are other people that think we took his playbook and that we indeed did colonize Mars and that we have a colony of astronauts there right now under his tutelage when he was alive.
There is compelling evidence that von Braun was working secretly with elements of the U.S. government in an attempt to try to make it to Mars. Is it possible that that was done? Do you think it's possible that the government could keep something a secret? Absolutely. Go back to the Manhattan Project. When they developed the nuclear bomb, there was over 140,000 personnel involved in that program. No one squealed. No one said what they were doing, and many of those people were unaware of what they were working on until the bomb itself was detonated. So von Braun could have been working on a secret Mars program, and with the same level of secrecy as the Manhattan Project, it still to this day could be highly classified and never released to the public at large.
Wernher von Braun's genius is credited with being the reason we ever made it to the moon. Might he have also orchestrated a secret mission to Mars? And if so, what was its purpose? Torrance, California, 2015. The board members of a private space agency led by Elon Musk, SpaceX, announce that the explicit aim of the organization is, and always has been, to help humanity colonize Mars.
I do think it is important that we as a species, as a civilization, are on a path to become a true spacefaring civilization and a multi-planet species.
Elon Musk's position is that humans cannot survive indefinitely on Earth, and there are a lot of threats to the continuation of human life on Earth, both from what we're doing to our own planet, but also from things like asteroids. We get a single hit from an asteroid that's as big as the one that took out the dinosaurs. And that, by the way, is a 100% probability that that is going to happen sooner or later. Going to Mars, it's a survival instinct. It's something we know it's somewhere in the back of our brains that we have to do or we die.
I think that's the message of the ruins of Mars, is that this can happen to you, and you should think about, as a species, ways to ensure that the human race is not wiped out, because despite our flaws, we're a very noble, powerful, important part of this universe.
It's something that will take us back to our very beginnings. And here we'll be really following in the footsteps of the ancient astronauts who came to Earth, and ultimately we will be like them, being the extraterrestrials ourselves and colonizing a foreign planet.
When we colonize Mars, it's a retracing of ancient footsteps. It will be a reconnection and a remembering of where we came from. And it may be that colonizing Mars will be our ultimate salvation.
Mars is a very, very logical point. If life on Earth ever should become impossible, that's our next step where to go if the survival of our species is at the forefront. Because maybe that's where we came from. So maybe we Earthlings are the Martians. Then the question is, has this game been going back and forth for hundreds of thousands of years?
Is it possible that the colonization of Mars is the key to our continued survival? And if so, have we stood on this precipice before? Could there have been a human presence on Mars thousands of years ago? Perhaps we will discover the truth about our alien ancestors when we become the extraterrestrials on Mars.